Okay. Well, great. Well, I'll try to make this brief. So I know, I'm sure there's plenty of questions. So we, try to make the presentation brief, and then we can get to everyone's questions. But yeah, first, just want to say, yeah, thanks for having us this morning, and inviting us to come to the meeting. Pleasure to be here. So my name's Jared Hart. I'm a division manager with the city's planning division, and I'm joined by Michael Brilliot. He's our deputy director for our citywide planning section. So just want to give some brief background on Opporunity Housing, kind of where we are and what the next steps are. So currently in San Jose, of all the land designated by the general plan for residential uses, 94% of it is designated for single family homes. You can see the extent of this on the general plan land use map that's shown on the screen here, with the light yellow showing all the land designated for single family homes. So the shortage of land to build homes is really one of the contributors of the housing shortage and affordability crisis. And that's, not unique to San Jose. That's an issue all over the Bay Area. And in San Jose, we see now that when you look at the median home sale prices, it's reached $1.225 million in the fourth quarter of 2020. So, with these issues and with the cost of housing, I think we all ask ourselves, where do workers, teachers, young families, and others go who can't afford a single family home in San Jose? A lot of families don't qualify for affordable housing, but also can't, quite afford a typical single family home in our city. Additionally, families might not always want to live in higher density developments, and might prefer single family neighborhoods if given the opportunity. So, what is Opporunity Housing? So there's the Opportunity Housing. It's a concept to deliver more housing choices by allowing additional housing types in existing single family neighborhoods, while also keeping the general form and scale of a typical single family residential neighborhood. We've had a lot of people ask us, if we're considering this to meet our housing production goals. And yeah, this would help some, but it's really just one strategy to help with those goals. What this really aims to do is provide additional housing choices rather than just, single family or large multifamily apartments or condos, which is kind of the primary choice that people have in San Jose today. So the Opportunity Housing would allow limited multi-unit housing, such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on properties with a residential neighborhood land use designation in the general plan, which we saw on the previous slide, which is typically applied to single family neighborhoods. It's Opportunity Housing is more affordable than traditional single family homes, really just by design, because they're going to be smaller in size. It can also be referred to as missing middle housing. That's probably the most common term we hear for this type of housing across the country, and that really refers to the scale of buildings, but occasionally used to kind of reference a missing housing type for middle income residents. Let's see slide here. So some cities have already allowed Opportunity Housing type developments. Minneapolis is probably one of the most probably got the most national attention, but as well as Seattle and Portland, and actually the state of Oregon's passed legislation to allow more housing types in their single family housing zones statewide. And then recently cities in Northern California are also following suit to allow additional housing choices in single family neighborhoods. Sacramento voted to include this effort as part of their general plan update, as well as South San Francisco. And then the City of Berkeley City Council has also joined this looking at this concept with this stated goal of ending exclusionary zoning. So it's kind of a concept and policy work that's gaining steam across the country in California. Okay, so why are we talking about opportunity housing? I'm sure there's questions of how did this work start? So as part of the general plan 4-year review, which is basically it's a periodic check-in, so to speak, of our general plan. It's something we do every 4-year review, every 4 years to kind of assess how the city's meeting the key goals and policies of the general plan. And then there's a scope of work is approved for those 4-year review processes by the city council. So as part of the 4-year review process, city council directed staff to explore opportunity housing. So staff was directed to explore this on single family parcels currently designated with residential neighborhood in the general plan to allow 2 to 4 units with a handful of different parameters, and that the parameters being that it would be limited to parcels near transit-oriented urban villages or immediately adjacent to residential parcels with existing medium density building types. Also developing a set of design guidelines, allowing flexibility on the number of units allowed per parcel, and clarifying that any redevelopment remains at the discretion of the property owner, as well as making sure that any policy work is sensitive to historic neighborhoods and validating that opportunity housing projects are cost effective.
2040 call for it to be.
So in response to that direction, the staff and as part of the general plan 4-year review, the general plan task force is kind of reconvened, and that's a community or stakeholder task force that was put together actually for the comprehensive update or development of our current general plan. So that task force is reconvened as part of this process to help provide input and recommendations to staff. So taking the council direction, staff and the task force looked at this as part of that process and discussed opportunity housing at 4 of the meetings of the task force. And we looked at allowing up to 4 units per parcel and analyzed, well, where does it make the most sense? We also looked at allowing a mix of single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, and also noting that there's existing state legislation that allows accessory dwelling units, or known as ADUs. So per state law, opportunity housing developments would be allowed to build ADUs if they comply with the city's zoning code. That's a question we've got commonly, but just want to know, however, given the constraints of a typical lot and lot size around the city, it would likely, not always be practical to build opportunity type housing plus ADUs in many circumstances. So as part of the process, staff and the task force looked at considerations and next steps that would be needed to further explore opportunity housing. So what's being recommended? So staff presented recommendations to the task force in February, July, and August last year at those task force meetings. And then so what staff recommended was to allow opportunity housing generally within a half-mile walk shed around transit-oriented urban villages and on parcels that share a property line with properties that already allow multifamily residential. So that's consistent with the direction given by City Council. At the August meeting, 2020 meeting for the task force has a different, slightly different recommendation. They recommended that the City Council should explore opportunity housing for properties citywide that have a residential neighborhood land use designation, and that staff should kind of proceed with a work plan if City Council wants to continue exploring opportunity housing. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that work plan as well. So we've received a lot of questions on what design standards would be and whether we would be changing setbacks, height, parking, floor area ratio, et cetera. But we really don't know those answers yet. It's too early in our process to make those determinations. We want to engage the community when we draft those and draft and revise those standards. And again, these changes would only be explored should the council provide direction to staff to continue to explore opportunity housing when they consider the policy updates coming out of the general plan 4-year review and likely in fall of this year. But as as I was mentioning in the earlier, from the scope of work from City Council, the intent here is to stay to the form and scale of typical single family neighborhoods. Then while also kind of allowing those, what's a lot of times termed as gentle densities, so a little bit more units up to the 4 units. We've also, received a lot of questions in terms of who'd be responsible for public utility and infrastructure needs. So just want to note that developers would continue to pay fees like the parkland impact fees, school fees, and other fees, to ensure that they're supporting added demand on the city's infrastructure. So another question that came up in a lot of discussion during the task force process is about the potential displacement of residents. What protection would there be for long-term renters in existing homes? So as part of our recommendation, staff would conduct a displacement risk analysis to identify communities at risk and if existing city protection, such as the Ellis Act ordinance, which protects renters in buildings constructed before 1979, as well as our apartment rent ordinance and other policies that are already in place are sufficient to address displacement, or if there's additional protections that need to be introduced. So this is kind of an action item for the second phase of this work if council wants to continue exploring opportunity housing. So just wanted to show the map here of staff's recommendation. This is this shows the half-mile area that's shaded in blue around the transit-oriented urban villages which are shown in the gray. And these are around, planned transit stations like BART, light rail, or bus rapid transit. And just again to note that staff recommendation would also allow properties that share a property line with other multifamily residential developments to have opportunity housing. It's a pretty small number of parcels. It's kind of sprinkled throughout the city, and it's so not shown on this map. This is District 1, just a zoom in of the previous map. So you can see that there's Stevens Creek urban villages is where through staff's proposal, at least with staff's proposal, where this policy concept would apply. These are some examples. I won't spend a lot of time on that on this, but again, the idea is that the form and style of development would fit into the existing single family neighborhoods in terms of preserving that character and form of those neighborhoods. Next steps. So at this time, staff, we're working on completing a cost effectiveness study that was requested as part of City Council's scope of work. We're studying the cost effectiveness for both the staff and task force recommendations by looking at different parts of the city and where it may or may not be cost effective and whether distance to an urban village or transit makes an impact. So that effort's underway, kind of still in the early stages there, but it's going to be included in the opportunity housing item that comes forward to council and our staff report, and that report will be available for the public and City Council to help to consider this policy item. Again, in terms of next steps, staff's going to take the package of task force recommendations from the general plan 4-year review, that's including opportunity housing, to City Council starting in late summer or fall. At that time, City Council will decide whether staff should continue pursuing developing an opportunity housing policy. If Council directs staff to pursue it, we'd begin a series of action items, including conducting extensive community engagement, conducting a displacement risk analysis, preparing design standards and reviewing them for feedback through the community engagement process, and then preparing an environmental analysis to identify potential impacts of opportunity housing. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation. We can open it up for questions. Here's our, we do have a website up, and so you're welcome to note this link. And if you have questions following this meeting, please see the general plan staff at sanjoseca.gov email there, and you can direct questions there, and our team can respond.
This is Michael. I just want to add a couple things. So I just want to make it clear that the task force has a different recommendation than staff, and staff still is finalizing its recommendation, right? We're taking input on that, but we'll likely take both recommendations to council, right? Staff has one and the task force has one, and the staff recommendation is really within the confines of the scope that council gave us, whereas the task force goes farther than that. And the other thing I just wanted to add is I've seen that there's a lot of questions about, what would be built? Would it be rental? Would it be for sale? How would it work? Would it be affordable? And staff has those same questions as any of you, and we don't know. And that's the reason for the cost feasibility analysis. So we've hired strategic economics out of Berkeley. And they're going to be analyzing, given the high cost of land in San Jose and given the rents that can be achieved, and given the variation of that within different parts of the city, where would this type of housing be built? What would be the rents? Would it be affordable to moderate income people or not? And would it tend to be for sale or rental or both? And would people typically just convert an existing house or scrape the property and build new? So these are all the questions that we have too. And I anticipate once we get some more, get some answers or some sense of what the answers are likely to be, that would inform both staff and council's direction on this work. I also want to just add that, I think this type of housing would not probably be, we don't expect it to be affordable for lower incomes. It's still probably going to be expensive, but the thought is, and the hope is it's less expensive than your typical single family home. And so that's one of the things that we have to test. But the intent is it's sort of housing for middle class people, not what we're building now is only housing for upper middle class people. So more for moderate incomes people, so allowing more people with more moderate incomes the opportunity to live in single family neighborhoods. With that, we can open up to questions.
So yeah, what I would like to do, Michael and Jared, thank you very much. Jared, that was an excellent presentation for setting the baseline of kind of where things have come and where they are. And Michael, your comments are appreciated, because I think staff has a challenging task here, because you have to you have your regular job to do, then you're doing this. So I want to hold off on other questions for a few minutes, because the steering board, based on questions we had asked from the larger community, had a whole bunch of questions, and then we kind of narrowed them down, and I tried to put them into PowerPoints, which I will share. The first one, and there it goes. This was presented at last month's, and I'm really, one of the premises is how much of San Jose residential single family zoning. I first saw it, the New York Times had said 94%, and I was believing that. That's what it says on the website for San Jose. But then a couple months ago, I looked at a study from CJ Gabb at SCU, and based on parcels, it was more like 78. And then based on population, it was more like 61%. And then a couple of weeks ago, I saw the planning map for San Jose, and I thought, well, maybe I can look at one area that I kind of know, and that's Hammond Park. And actually, I was surprised. The yellow is single family residential. And I thought it'd be more single family residential. I thought it would be like at 94%. And clearly, just a quick glance at this, it doesn't look like 94%. But then I started looking at it a little closer, and I found that it includes Monroe Middle School is considered single-family residential. Hammond Park is considered single-family residential. Castlemont is considered multifamily, oddly enough. And then there's a couple parcels like this one here. I know this is an apartment complex, and when I did the math, I didn't include it because it wasn't the brown, it was the planned development or something like that. So I did the math on this, and I came up with about 63% in Hammond Park, which I thought, well, this is probably pretty typical. And again, it seems like the schools should be more public quasi. And the spreadsheet, I can link to it if you guys want it. It's right there, how I came to that calculation. Last night, I spent way too much time looking at the map for D1. And again, these maps are from the City of San Jose's interactive zoning thing. So it looks like there's a lot of single family. But then I started looking at it closer, and there's about 30 sites that, again, are yellow, but there are things like schools. You can see them listed here, or parks. And then there's even one place called the Regency Park condos, which are kind of behind Bollinger and Miller, right up here. And that's a big yellow. So it looks like single family residential. So, and then, zooming out to a higher level, again, looking at that same map, there's big portions of yellow, which are clearly rural areas, and you don't want to build up there anyhow because it's up in the hills. And so if you're doing it by acreage, I have to think that if based on the parcels that seem to be residential, single family residential, that's how you get the 94%. But the reality is that's not accurate. So Michael, if you want to talk to that for a moment, I saw you put something in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, so that number from the New York Times actually came from our team. So I think, Ken, I put in the chat, but I think you're looking at the zoning, which includes Dutch Hammond zoning from the 1960s in Coyote Valley and up in the hillside. And schools are zoned single family, but what we were using is the general plan. So, schools in the general plan are typically designated PQP, and apartments are designated high density. So it's the general plan land use designation of the property.
But I'd like to see those numbers. Certainly you have them somewhere, because it just still isn't adding up.
Well, I mean, Jared did the analysis with his staff, so he can talk to them. I mean, we can share them with you. Jared,
Yeah.
you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. We're happy to follow up and share the numbers. But yeah, that's kind of the differences we provided the figures for the New York Times, and then they wrote it as zoning, even though we told them this is our general plan designation, for single family homes. And but they wrote it, in terms of the article, they wrote it as zoning. So yeah, there's a difference between the general plan designation in terms of, the general plan designates future uses and where those are allowed versus the zoning. And as Michael was mentioning, our zoning is oftentimes does not match with the general plan land use designation. So we have, some of those areas out in the hillsides in the general plan are designated for open space, but they have these kind of legacy R1 zonings back from the 1950s. And so that's where the difference is. So when you look at the general plan and zoning, you're going to get two different numbers. But we can look at the zoning too, and we can certainly pull that, what within the city's jurisdiction, or oftentimes we like to look, probably like for this analysis, we would look at, well, what's within the city's urban service area, and we could look at, well, how much of that is zoned for single family, R1, however you'd be pulling in schools.
It just seems like there's something that's not being compared apples to apples in this calculation. But Steve and Ramona, I noticed, are your questions related to this?
I just want to add something to this. So the policy that's being considered by council is on lands designated for single family in a general plan, right, Jared? It's not single family zoning per se.
Correct. Correct.
Right. So that's why,
the general
and that not the 94% number that happened before we were talking about this, but just be clear. The general plan is what dictates how you can redevelop a property. Zoning, frankly, is irrelevant. And so that's we're using the general plan, not the zoning for this work.
So you're saying the general plan is 94%?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And so per state law and council direction, we are going through a process of aligning zoning to match the general plan. That's going to probably be like a 3-year process. So in the not too distant future, this will not be an issue anymore, but San Jose has never matched zoning with general plan because we never had to. So it's creating a lot of confusions, as the confusion we're having right now, right?
Right.
It creates a lot of confusion for people like, hey, I want to build on my property. What's the zoning? You're not asking the right question. You should ask, what is my general plan land use designation? People get really confused.
Okay, well, I'll look at the map that I found here on the site and where it came from. I thought I had a link. Steve, Ramona, do you guys have questions about this particular question? Because there are other questions we want to go through as well.
I had just a couple of quick things. I guess I'll throw them in here. The first thing is I want to make sure we have access to these slides. I don't know if these are online.
Yes, they'll be online.
Okay.
I created them, so.
Oh, no, not your slides. I'm sorry. The slides that Michael and Jared were showing.
Oh yeah, sure thing. We can send them to Ken.
Okay.
Or just put them in the chat menu or what? Yeah, okay, that's fine.
If you don't have a link already, I just want to make sure we've got these exact slides that you were showing, that we've got those. I found other slide sets on the website, but I wanted to make sure we had these.
Yeah, I think we have our slides from our presentations to the task force posted on the website, but yeah, happy to provide these as well. So I will, I'll send those along.
And I do have one other question, Ken. I can hold that to the end of your standard set of questions though, if you want.
That'd be great. Yeah, here was the, let's see if I can, here's the map I used, by the way, if you guys can see this. This is on the San Jose website, so you can tell, this is called land use zoning. So you're saying this isn't what I should be using?
Yes, so I can put in, I'll put in a link to a chat too. We have, so we've got, yeah, right, this is the zoning. And
so is this the one you guys
used
then to get the 94% or not?
No, you're right. So what we did was looked at the general, and we looked at the general plan map, the land use designations, and said, okay, within the within the urban service area of the land that's designated residential, how much of it is designated for single family homes? And that's where the 94% is coming from. It's really just like a high level number to kind of illustrate like that, much of the land in San Jose is designated for single family uses. And I know there's a lot of questions about, okay, beyond that, right, when you drill down, how much land would this actually apply to, when you start to drill down into zoning? So we understand there's been a lot of questions and confusion on that. So that's something we're going to be doing, is kind of crunching those numbers to try to drill down another level in terms of as we, head towards taking this item to council in terms of pulling in the zoning. But oftentimes is you were pointing out, Ken, it's like the zoning's not consistent with the general plan, so you end up pulling in these in terms of existing uses. There's you end up pulling in schools. So we'll be taking a look at that though, because we understand there's a lot of questions and confusion.
Yeah, let's table this and let me go through some of the other questions before I kind of open it up. We saw that. This was a general question, and again, this might not be for you guys to answer. Maybe this is something more with when it gets to council. How is operating opportunity housing consistent with 2040's goals and policies for things like environment, network, interconnected city. What's the vision for San Jose in 2040 and how does opportunity housing fit into that? And another question, can't the city wait and see how much housing is needed until after the urban villages are completed? And again, that may not be so much for staff. So
I can respond to this.
okay.
Yeah, so I think, so some background. So, I'll give you the full background here. So under General Plan 2020, which is the previous general plan that was approved in 1994, there were a number of policies in that plan that kind of were like, okay, the land use designation is single family, or the land use designation is, industrial or commercial. But it was kind of anything goes. There's all these discretionary alternate use policies. And if a parcel is less than 2 acres, then kind of, there was a lot of flexibility. So one of the things that was starting to happen, I think it was happening in Willow Glen actually, is that people were buying single family lots. And it didn't happen a lot. It was just, I think there was maybe a few projects and it started, people were worried it was going to be a trend, but that people were buying, maybe 5 or 6 old homes that were maybe a little run down, and they would buy them, tear them down, and combine the lots and build court homes or townhomes. And I think there was a lot of concern about that. And then, of course, and San Jose's approach in the past had been building higher density in areas that were not in single family neighborhoods, or even often adjacent to single family neighborhoods. We would typically convert farmland or industrial land to new neighborhoods. But those areas were done and gone. And so the approach was the urban village strategy. And there was kind of this grand bargain in Envision San Jose that said, hey, we're not going to have all these discretionary policies, because people felt like we really didn't even have a general plan, like it was sort of an anything goes plan. And so we're getting rid of that. And so what we're saying is we're going to allow high density in these urban villages, which are not single family neighborhoods. And the yellow parts of the city, which is, if you saw Jared's map, we can go back to it, is frankly the majority of the city, which is the single family. Those are going to be preserved and protected, and we're not putting growth in those areas. We're going to focus on the urban villages. And it was kind of this grand bargain, and people agree with that. And that's the plan that we have today. And that's the plan that is that concept or that bargain is kind of being revisited, frankly, as part of opportunity housing. So why is this happening? So I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, one reason is that we have a housing crisis. I think I don't need to explain that. I think probably most of you are aware of that. A lot of the baby boomers, of course, have all have their houses, and their children are not able to afford living in San Jose, at least not buying a home. And we have a net migration out of the city relative to people coming into the city. So housing crisis. And I think the other reason is, frankly, the cost of development. So what we're finding is, and I'm talking pre-pandemic, pandemic is making this worse. And of course, we hope that this will go back to some new normal where this issue will go away. But pre-pandemic, what we were finding was that even given the exorbitant cost of new housing in San Jose, particularly rental housing, we're not building for sale anymore. Even given how high the rents were, those rents were not high enough to cover the increasing cost of construction. So pre-pandemic construction costs were going up 1% a month. And were way more expensive than other places. For example, Los Angeles, some of you, well, whatever, but we're way more expensive than Southern California. So costs are just going up through the roof. And part of that has been, the cost of land and the cost of housing for the workers here, right? And so what that has meant is that a lot of our urban villages, a lot of our high density or medium density housing types, the 4/1, the 5-story projects, ground floor retail and 4 apartments above or 5 apartments above or whatever, those projects were not going to construction because they couldn't finance them. And they couldn't finance them because the revenue was too low relative to the cost to build them. And so we've really seen a stall on this type of development. And part of that is, frankly, that, these high density projects are very complicated. as well. And so one of the approaches was that, hey, let's more democratize development. So back in the day, in the old days, housing was built by small contractors. I live in a house from 1929. It was built by small builders. With Levitt, starting with Levittown in Long Island in 1946 or 7, we've gone to taking the Model T form of assembly line construction, and we applied that to home building. And so then it got into big capital building housing. And now we're not building the assembly line housing anymore, the Model T Ford housing, K&B homes, etc. What we're into this high density stuff, this medium density stuff. Those projects are very complicated, and they need Wall Street capital. They need CalPERS pension fund. And so what we're trying to do, we've had great success with ADUs. We've gone from 19 a year to like over 400 a year in about 5 years. And so the idea is to build upon the success of ADUs and get small builders back in the business of building and providing housing. Again, that's still theoretical, right? This is a theoretical hypothesis. And one of the things we're doing is the cost of development analysis to understand to what degree this will likely be true. So it is just another tool in the toolbox to try to address the housing crisis. The other sort of thing that's happened is the discussion around equity, particularly the government's role in perpetuating inequities. We all know, I think, about redlining. Redlining is gone, although effects of redlining in many cities, including parts of San Jose, are still being felt today. But the more legacy of that is the single family zoning. So there's been and with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of discussions about equity and how government has contributed to that, there's conversation about how we could sort of right wrongs past. And so that's been part of, I think, the task force conversation around this. Again, is this going to be for low income people? We are going to explore opportunities that, encourage deed restricted opportunity housing, but the reality is it's not. It's still going to be expensive. So it'll just be more affordable or less expensive. So these are kind of all the things that I think have been driving, kind of the discussion around opportunity housing. And I think the focus on opportunity housing was more putting around the transit areas, but the task force, I think, really driven by the inequity issues, have focused on on applying it everywhere in the city. And so that's just a little bit of background I wanted to give you and some kind of the thinking behind why we are having this conversation today.
So get to some of these other questions so we can get to the the questions that people have out there. We learned in the urban village process that if we got to 35 to 55 units per acre, depending on the mix of pure residential versus residential and with some commercial, that you basically pay for your infrastructure costs. The opportunity housing doesn't have that kind of density. So is that being reconciled?
Right. So there was one study that we did do as part of the previous 4-year review. And I think, so higher density housing tends to be more income generating. The other takeaway from that is that residential is a money loser for the city, largely when it's older. I think that has a lot to do with Prop 13. So this work, in terms of, is it fiscally positive? Is it a fiscal drain on the city if we allow opportunity housing? That has not been done. Are we doing it over the next 3 or 4 months? No, we are not. Could council direct us to do a fiscal analysis of the impacts of opportunity housing, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral? They very well could. And that could be, feedback to the council, and they could say, hey, we want to know that. And we could re-engage our consultant and say, let's start running the numbers and see what this would do to the city coffers.
Thank you, Michael. Hopefully our vice mayor took a note on that. The guardrails, some of the things that have been brought up is, could developers crowd out individuals because they could pay more for a specific parcel? And the next slide, well, this slide actually kind of shows it, this idea of so they buy one parcel, they kind of rent it out for a while, then they buy a second one, then a third, then a fourth, and now they've created effectively a buy right development, and then they redevelop the whole thing, and suddenly where it was a residential neighborhood, becomes a totally different thing, which may or may not be okay. But again, are those things being looked at in the study?
Right. So a lot of this stuff has to be figured out. But again, our approach is, as Jared said, is this. It's to retain the single family fabric of the neighborhood, to keep the lot pattern the way it is, to not sort of allow people to buy lots of lots, assemble them, and do something that's different in sort of scale. The idea at this point is to keep the single family box, keep the setbacks, keep the height, but allow more than one unit within that box. So if someone did buy a series of single family parcels, as at least currently conceived as now, they could do that, but they would have to build within the single family box on each property. And they could put maybe 2 units or 3 units or 4 units in each of those boxes, but they wouldn't be building sort of the court home projects. Now, there have been some conversations about, well, wait a minute, we love those Hollywood court homes that you see in the film noir movies from the 1940s that are all over Los Angeles. They have like a little pedestrian plaza and there's little bungalows built around them and the parking's in the back. We have a few of those in San Jose, not a lot. Could we allow those? And so maybe there is a way to allow those too. That would be part of the, exploring the actual, ordinance and policy framework. Could those be allowed? How would they be allowed?
And I imagine mobility plays into this as well, as far as the guardrails, again, to make sure that it doesn't impact a negative on the environment.
In terms of parking?
Yeah, well, parking, just, adding to traffic, that kind of, the concerns that people have expressed.
Yeah, so I mean, parking is kind of a challenging one, right? So on one hand, parking decreases the opportunity for housing and is expensive. On the other hand, I know we hear that parking is an impact. And so that's going to be one of the things to sort of, thread the needle, right? So if you require a lot of parking, then you may not be build anything more than a single family house. But if you don't provide any parking, then, people will be parking all over the street. And it's not just an issue of, gee, I don't like people I don't know parking in front of my house. Maybe it's hard to find a parking space. So that's the kind of stuff that would have to be figured out if council gives us direction to proceed. And I think when council does, they will likely say, staff, proceed like this. And here's additional things we want you to do and more information that we want.
And as Pierluigi suggests, that state itself limits your ability to control some things like, limiting parking and so forth. Other things to consider, opportunity housing, does it allow for a condo type approach? I mean, is there going to be actual opportunity for equity? And, what about community land trusts? I just brought up an example of one here from Tempe.
Yeah, so definitely it would. I mean, I think as part of the housing displacement program, we are looking at community land trusts as ways for people. So we are exploring that concept, not us planners, but the city housing department. And I think really, to be honest, our hope is that, so we're not building for sale housing anymore. Let's just be honest, we're not. We build high density rental, and you can buy an existing single family home built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe the 20s, whatever. That's the housing choice, that's it. And so we're hoping is what this would open up is a different for sale type, which could be that, for example, 2 or 3 units on a single family lot. And actually one of the photos that was in Jared's presentation was an actual project that was built in San Jose by Adam Mayberry in a single family neighborhood that was a 2-unit project. And that's the intent, is that we wouldn't just see rental, we'd see for sale. So it would allow people to be able to afford to buy something. Now, they're not going to be cheap, right? But they're going to be less expensive than buying a traditional single family house. And again, that's one of the things that we need to have our consultant test. Given the economics of different places within the city, is that something we would expect to be built or not, right? We don't have the answer to that, but that's our hope.
let's say almost, okay, so here are the, I think these are the last questions and I'll get, so it's been introduced in Portland, Minneapolis and so forth. Has it seen, rent reduction? Has it worked well in other cities? And then the last question is, can it be put to a citywide vote?
Yeah, I think for other cities with, I guess for the recent policy changes that have been implemented in those other cities, I think there's not enough data yet to kind of show if those policy actions have had effects on like the rental market in those cities, whether bringing the rents down overall, because they're fairly new policy changes in terms of in Minneapolis and in Oregon. So I think that we'll have to wait and see what happens, and if there's any kind of measurable change that you could see from that policy action. I guess what I'd say is, if you just look at just purely looking at existing opportunity housing types, like if you look at rents in a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, they will typically be less expensive than rents renting a single family home. Same goes for sale condo versus a traditional single family home. So I think that in terms of the rents probably still hold true there, but in terms of kind of the macro effect on the rents citywide, I think we still need to, we'll have to see as time goes on in those cities.
And in terms of, could the city the voters of San Jose vote on this? They certainly could. They could put something on the ballot. There is there was a question in chat I just wanted to address. I think state is trying to push housing, and they are taking local controls away. They are. I'm just going to lay it out there. There's a lot of things we do not have local control anymore, and I would anticipate that's going to become more so. And I think one of the things, with allowing up to 3 additional ADUs in a multifamily site, and then that was the state saying we're going to push housing. Cities are not doing enough. And by the way, when Senator Weiner had said, he actually said this to us. He actually said it directly and specifically. He says, if you're wondering why we're doing this to you, it's because of Cupertino. That's what he actually said. We're doing this because of Cupertino, specifically Cupertino, for the whole state. I think, but however, San Jose, there has at least been one state law that's been passed where San Jose sponsored legislation to have a carve out for San Jose that has different sets of rules because San Jose is doing good things. And so I think we understand this issue. Well, wait a minute, if you allow 4 units of a duplex or 4 units on single family, then you can do 3 ADUs, that's 7 units. I know that's really freaking people out. And I think it's one of those things that if the council were to move forward with this, the council could direct staff and say, hey, let's look at some legislative changes to say you could do opportunity housing or you could do ADUs, you can't do both. And I think that's something that could be explored. No guarantees that would go anywhere, but I think that is something that it would be worth exploring.
And again, I think this next question was really more for the council member. And given the time, I'll just kind of skip through these. The question, as far as why not wait for the other cities and see what happens. It was mentioned in the chat about the Minnesota State Supreme Court ruling against the city of Minneapolis and so forth. And so I think that's the heart of this question, is why not wait and see what happens in other places. The question about jobs, housing imbalance, again, is that something staff is studying right now, or is that something they have to be directed to study?
Well, we're always studying the jobs, housing imbalance. We track it on a regular annual basis, and we report that to council. So I don't know.
The question would be, I guess, in the context of opportunity housing, I mean, is more likely going to be built in areas where there are no jobs today. And then, will that just make the job housing imbalance worse because, you'll have more people going from the south to the north, say?
Right, so that's a good question. I think that was one of the thinking behind why you would do it more on that transit side of things. But yeah, that's a really good question, and we'd have to look at that. So again, so San Jose, there's a thing called a heat map for vehicle miles traveled. It's a VMT map. So as part of the environmental analysis, we need to understand, like, okay, if this were to happen, what does that do to our VMT? So those are the kind of things we would study, and we're definitely thinking about. But we wouldn't do that unless council says, go forward, and then we would do that work.
Okay, and I think this was, I think, already kind of addressed about the local control resolution. And this was kind of addressed with the question of kind of a citywide vote. This was be more in a district vote. And I think this question here, yeah, this was the last slide. Who or what is driving opportunity housing and where are they doing? So that was our final question from the list we curated. So I don't know if.
Well, I think I addressed that, right?
Yeah.
Already, which is the housing crisis, the cost of construction impacting. We're not seeing the urban village type projects are not moving forward anymore. And the equity sort of and history of government, basically policies of exclusion.
So Ramona, you've had your hand up. It must be tired by now. You haven't spoken at all meetings. So why don't you?
Yeah, my hand is exhausted. Okay, so I had just a couple comments. Okay, so the zoning map and the general plan use designation are not in alignment. You say they're going to take 3 years for that to be in alignment. And as you can see, there's a lot of confusion among us who are actually kind of up on what's going on, based on the fact that they aren't in alignment. So your average resident is definitely going to be even more confused about it. So why are we going forward with this until we have those in alignment first? Because that to me would make more sense to have everything in alignment. So that's very clear exactly what our land use designation is. That's my first thought. My second thought is, why does San Jose have to be a pilot program for this? You know, it just got implemented in a couple other cities. Why do we need to be the first? Why can't we wait and see what happens in other cities before we go forward with this? My third comment is we're going into a huge budget deficit in the city. And I think 18 months of staff time and tax dollars to investigate, or, you know, however you want to call it, to scope out all the parameters of what this opportunity with housing would look like, seems like it's not a good use of our tax dollars at this particular time. So I think we should personally wait, see how other cities do it, and finish out our urban village plan, which is very clear in our 2040 about where housing should be put. And that's my thought. Thank you.
That's great. Steve, you've had your hand up too.
Yeah, I had a quick question for Michael and Jared. When I look at the task force recommendations, I see a plan that will significantly disrupt the existing single family home experience. And my question to you guys is, do you disagree, and you've convinced yourself it will not be a significant disruption to single family home, or do you agree, but you feel like this disruption is necessary and worthwhile?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big change. If this moves forward, this is a big change for San Jose. I understand that, and change is scary. And let's be clear, I mean, staff does have a position on this. We have a recommendation, that's our position. So we think that in some way, whatever the council decides, we need to figure out ways to allow more housing within single family areas. We do. I think we're, as many reasons I've said, that we're at a standstill. We're really struggling to build housing in the city. And we're seeing, you know, a lot of people that grew up in single family neighborhoods that want to go back, they've been priced out. So, you know, it's more a matter of like, how do you get there? How do you do that? And I think what's important is just to be having this conversation and thinking about it and seeing, is there a way to do this? We think it is important that we have this conversation and we explore doing something. And yeah, will there be impacts? I mean, it depends on how you define impact. So we do environmental analysis, and we will analyze that thing. So yeah, I could say this, would it be a change? Yes, it would be a change. We don't anticipate, well, so again, we don't know how much this housing would actually get built. That's a question we're analyzing. We are thinking that, we're not anticipating that there would be wholesale changes where whole neighborhoods would change, but it would probably be, projects here and there, not unlike what's happening with ADUs. We can look at that sort of as an example. The other thing is, I mean, I am biased, to be honest. I live in a neighborhood. I grew up in a neighborhood. I grew up in a triplex. I live in a neighborhood right now where I have a duplex directly across the street and 3 more that I could throw a rocket at or a baseball. I happen to live next to the mayor too. So, I mean, I think our neighborhood is very mixed up. We have many different kinds of people, and I think it really works well. But again, ultimately, the councils has a lot of considerations, and they're going to need to figure out. And we're there to help them think this through. And all of you are helped there to give them feedback to think about, okay, if we're going to try, should we try it? And if we do, how should it be done? Should it be a pilot? Should we say you can do this, but there should be some additional limitations? That's the kind of stuff that has to be figured out and talked about, right? Like, I mean, the task force is going big. And we understand that's going to, people are going to go, whoa, that's a little too much and too scary for us. Let's take a smaller bite at this and see how it goes. And that could be, frankly, an approach the council may want to try. And that may make sense for the city, given that this is a pretty bold, huge change for where the city has been in the past.
Yeah, I would encourage you in your messaging just to really acknowledge the fact that this is a huge disruption to the existing single family home experience. Just recognize that, and then let's move forward. Maybe it's necessary, for the equity, cost of development, and other things that you mentioned, but just acknowledge the fact that for people who have spent their lifetimes living in this environment, it will be a big change.
Doris, you have your hand up, and then Bob.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm just wondering why you are suggesting, actually, I typed it in the chat, spending all this, I presume taxpayer money, city's resources for your study when council originally was suggesting building more homes along the transit corridors. And kind of as Ramona suggested, wait and see what the urban villages do provide for us. And the numbers that you're throwing out there are scaring people. This 94% is single family, and that's not true. And yet everything that we read, you're incorporating those numbers in there. So I think it would be nice if you could tone those back somehow and kind of get to the realism of the numbers, so that we're not considering schools and streets as part of your 94%. And it just, wait and see how all the rest of these pan out before you start with this 18-month study that you're going to be putting the council through, because that's going to be a lot of taxpayer money. Thank you.
Bob.
Hey, Jared, Michael, thank you for the presentation. And the 2040 task force actually was pretty much evenly split on this issue. And 2 of the 3 city council members on the task force was opposed to this proposal. I think the staff's original proposal of a half a mile from transit corridors was too generous in its own right. We need to take a look at opportunity housing, but it should only be a quarter mile from the transit corridors. It'd be nice to see that in staff's recommendation, sort of to counterbalance what the 2040 task force did. There's just way too many unknown questions. The cumulative impacts with the state mandates, how it's going to impact city services from parking to parks to schools. That's not a city service, but we have no idea the traffic issues associated with it. We have no idea what's going to happen to the market if suddenly everybody can put 7 units or 4 units on every property. Will The speculators jump in and buy up all the properties now, and so the whole market, no one can buy a single family house if they want to. So this is just too big a change to throw out there. I'm adamantly opposed to what the 2040 task force said. I think we do need to experiment with this opportunity housing and do a pilot, as you said, Michael, but it needs to be a pilot. This is sort of lunacy to go through and try to propose it through every property in the city.
And there's also a lot of good content in the chat room as well. And we've gone, I don't know, gosh, it's my fault. We've gone like 12 minutes over. So I don't know if there are any other comments.
And we do need to vote on the minutes before we adjourn.
Okay, so before we vote on the minutes, I do really want to thank, thank all the staff, of course, Vice Mayor staff, but Michael and Jared especially for jumping in today on your Saturday morning, when I'm sure there's many more things that you could be doing right now. So thank you very much for presenting to us.
You bet. Thanks.
Yeah,
I just got a text that my son scored a goal in soccer.
Oh no! I'm sorry you missed. Oh darn it! Okay, thank you very much, then.
We have sports 5 days a week, so it's okay.
Well, yeah, I know. Don't want to miss those times. So
yeah, but thanks a lot. I mean, I know this is a hard conversation. I know that we don't maybe always have the same perspective or align, but it's really important that we hear all perspectives and understand it. And I know this is a big change, and so people have concerns, so we get it. But yeah, no, thanks. It was great.
Thank you for inviting us. Great discussion.
Why you're not going to just go along with the council's suggestion, why you're proposing to spend all this money on to force them onto an 18-month study. You guys didn't answer my question, and I would appreciate that, hearing your thoughts. Well,
so the work that we're doing as part of the 4-year review has been directed that we do it by council. And then in October, we're anticipating October, council would give us direction on what if we do more work and what that would look like. So it's really at the direction of council. I will say that we are getting grant money from the state to do a lot of this work, or would be. We have money from the state to do this work going forward, at least for part of it, not all of it. But it's really that council's given us direction to do this work so far and would do it if we go further.
You could just jump in.
Well, how do you do that?
Just talk.
oh, looks like there's several. Hey, Richard.
Yeah. Hi, Richard Kabanik. I'm here with a whole bunch of people in our room. Hey, I just recall, remember Ron Gonzalez? He was mayor. I recall Ron saying that he was going to put a moratorium on new housing in San Jose until the business and the industry caught up with the jobs. Because right now, I think you mentioned that 70% of the people in San Jose go to another city to work. And he was saying that, we really don't want to become the bedroom community of the peninsula. We need more industry in San Jose. So he put a moratorium on building new housing in San Jose until the industry caught up. And I'm just wondering, listening to this presentation, whatever happened to that idea that we really should have more industry and less housing? It seemed like he was also, and I've gone to many meetings in San Jose where they're talking about the amount of revenue per person. Palo Alto has got thousands of dollars more revenue because they have jobs. Menlo Park, Cupertino, San Jose is way down on the bottom as far as money from businesses to help run the city. And I'm just wondering how is that being involved with this presentation that we want more housing? And I haven't heard anybody talking about business. I haven't heard anybody talking about jobs. I just hear housing. Could somebody enlighten me on that? I'd really appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Richard, I think you're referring to Mayor Chuck Reed. Mayor Ron Gonzalez was the housing mayor. He converted hundreds of acres of industrial land to housing. So it wasn't him, it was Chuck Reed. And That's reflected in our current general plan, which was a product of the Chuck Reed era. Our general plan is very much about building jobs and creating not just a balance, but being more heavy on the job side than housing. So there's a whole body of work going on that. And one aspect of that the council's been really successful at is not converting our employment land to housing. I don't think we've converted anything since 2011. I know there is a proposal going forward to convert a little piece of land by Santa Clara University, but you know, council's done a great job holding that line. So it's a whole other body of work that's going on separately from what we're talking about today. Jared, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess I just add that you know, while this policy is about housing, and like Michael said, that those major strategies and goals of in terms of employment and bringing San Jose from, you know, the largest bedroom community city in the country to a more balanced community with jobs and housing, those goals and policies don't go away, and we continue to work and implement those that policy work. Also, in terms of any housing added through Opportunity Housing, the idea is that it wouldn't necessarily be additional housing above what's already planned for in our general plan. So our general plan plans for, you know, over the lifetime of the plan, it's, you know, a certain amount of housing units, and this doesn't add to it. It's more just about, well, how do we, you know, provide that housing that we've already planned for. So in terms of, you know, trying to balance the jobs and our jobs and housing, this kind of fits in with the current planned growth of our general plan as it relates to housing.
Richard and Betty get the award for best watch party, by the way, and the best pot of coffee. So, hey, Carol.
All right.
So, are there any other comments, or should we? Oh, we have to vote on the minutes, don't we, Steve Ling? And
I make a motion, we accept the minutes.
I had one comment.
okay.
There's the spelling of the new. I sent it on to Steve so he can pick it up. But the spelling of Helen Cassa should be Kassa, not Casa. I sent that to Steve. So this is just a spelling typo. That was all.
Okay.
So with that, you seconded it, though, right? Was that your second as well?
Yes.
Okay. So any discussion minutes? Here. Oh, go ahead, Doris.
No, I was just thought you were calling for the vote, and
we had just called for the vote. Let's see. I guess we could just raise our hands. Literally, I guess. I think I see. Well, let Steve be the counter.
Raise your hand, Richard, you're part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't see the entire screen at once.
Yeah, you have to kind of flip. And of course, Kit, give us a verbal.
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? That might be the easier way.
Yeah, that's easier.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we've got
I think we're good.
Okay. So with that, I thank you everyone for bearing with us and all this. And Doris, did you have one last comment?
I had my hand out. Now it's down.
Okay, so thank you guys, everyone. We'll look forward to meeting in person in a couple months then.